Welcome back to Football Weather. The season is over officially, and we had quite an ending to the season for us, obviously. Obviously with our home field apparel choices, you can kind of tell where the sentiments were in the national title game. But Matt Blaszka, after a little bit of a hiatus, it's good to talk to you again, my friend. How you doing?
Absolutely, yeah. It's been a week, or maybe it's been 2 weeks now. I know you've been running the entire gauntlet of the country at this point, but yeah, I think I'm wearing the same sweatshirt for the third straight episode. But it's not because I haven't ordered anything. I just can't make a decision of what I want.
No.
So that's been fun. And also, like, when we started this podcast, neither of us probably would have thought the first year that our hometown team would win the national championship. But certainly, this has been a fun way to start this show. But it's exciting to finally talk about some things. It's been 2 weeks, probably our longest gap since we started in August, for having discussions about the larger picture of college football.
Right. And I think that's the joy of this sport and talking about this sport is we get to constantly talk about bigger picture issues while also zooming in on the micro levels of the sport when the games are being played. And it's great week by week. You can kind of lose track of the forest for the trees when you're in the midst of the season. But now we get a chance to pull the lens back a bit and see, well, gosh, what the heck's going on? What did we learn? What did we not learn? What do we think we figured out about college football and where it's at? We talked about some of these things during the season, but now we can talk about them without the pressure of an upcoming week changing the perspective. So, on the show today, we're going to talk about what happened in the last round of the playoff, Indiana knocking off Miami, what we took out of that. And then we'll start talking a little bit about the overall playoff format changes, what we thought about the way the playoff worked this year, some things that we would potentially recommend improving on, or where we thought it worked well. And then we've obviously got some national news stuff that we need to tackle, a couple of big stories that have popped up. And so we'll do all of that on this edition of Football Weather. First of all, just a reminder, we are brought to you by Home Field Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs. Home Field Apparel all over Hard Rock Stadium. I was down there. I mean, it's amazing to see what they have accomplished as a company in 10 years. They are the kings of cool when it comes to putting amazing logos on clothing that people want to wear to stadiums. And we have certainly got a chance to experience the full home field on the Crimson Cast side of things. We hosted a couple of events with them, one in Atlanta and a couple in Miami. Those were really great, and got a chance to meet some of our college football commentator brethren, or at least I did. Stephen Godfrey and Richard Johnson both came on the live show that we did for Crimson Cast in Miami Beach. And so head over to homefieldapparel.com, use the code HOME23, get 15% off your first order. If you're an Indiana fan, lots of amazing championship merch as well as merch from the rest of the playoff run. And if you are a fan of any other team, essentially, you're going to find some cool stuff there as well. So again, homefieldapparel.com. Be sure to follow them on social media also. All right, Matt. Well, I was at the game. You were at home watching from the comfort of your television. I would love to get first your overall impressions on what we saw in that national championship contest, Indiana winning 27-21. Your thoughts on the contest?
Yeah, I mean, for the first half, it definitely seemed like it was going to be a runaway. If IU dominate the first half, Miami didn't really move the ball very much until their last drive, and they missed that field goal. And then that second half was really a lot of fun to watch between Beck making some good throws, obviously the Mendoza play. But at the end of the day, it just seemed like Indiana had one more play in them every single time. They never let the lead get away. They led the entire way. It was really impressive to watch that team, which if their line was getting bullied a lot of the day, I mean, that the O-line of Indiana talked about that. Like, that's the best line they've seen all year. We saw the marks, we saw the blood, we saw the scrapes. And that's, I know we'll talk about this here in a second, but that's a larger takeaway probably from this playoff too, is the line play is going to be the dominant story, I think, going into this offseason, because we saw a lot of teams that had that dominant line play really prevail throughout this playoff, including Indiana. I mean, they just ran into a better line with some guys that are going to go in the draft here pretty early. But again, it's to come away from this game and watch Indiana win a national championship for the first time since first new champion since '96 Florida. I think it's great for the sport that we're seeing this, and we'll get into that. I think bigger picture items as well. But it was really impressive to watch even Miami having their back against the wall, not playing a great first half, to come back, get that big run, get that kind of monkey off their back, and IU having to play back and forth the whole second half with a team that was playing pretty well in the second half. That one more pass could have changed anything, but Miami, just comes up a little bit short here at the end. So good national championship. I think both these teams will be back based on what we saw in the portal, or maybe not. We're still waiting on the quarterback for Miami. We'll see what happens there. But certainly, it was a really fun national championship with two really good teams, and probably the two best teams at the end of the day.
I would agree with all of that. I'll say this. I think that the line disparity, as it were, in the game, I've heard a lot of people talking about that, and that was certainly the impression that one got when watching the game. As I've gone back and rewatched it, I'm not sure it was actually as big of a disparity because of the way that Indiana was able to respond on the ground to the pass rush that Miami was putting forward. They did make life very difficult on Fernando Mendoza.
Mm-hmm.
Indiana almost, it felt like on purpose, was isolating their tackles and they were like, we're going to make more hay if we are running regular routes and doing our normal blocking trees rather than trying to max protect on either edge. And so it did give the impression that Miami was just manhandling Indiana's O-line. And I did hear from some people that were relatively close. It's like they were shocked at the physicality that Miami played with.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I would argue it never really negatively impacted Indiana's offense to the point where they were stopped. And, you look at what they did, Kalon Black rushing for 4.6 yards per carry, and even Roman Hemby rushing for 3.2. I mean, you look at those two guys, as the primary runners, plus the Nowakowski touchdown. I mean, Indiana had 8 carries that went -9 yards, but when you take those out, they had 37 carries that went for 140 yards, which is a pretty good day at the office. And so even though Indiana looked stymied in the passing game, it's almost as if like it was an equilibrium where Indiana was like, we want you to rush us like that because we think we can pick up some things on the ground. And for the most part, except for that period in the third quarter, it worked for them. And I will say that even though Indiana didn't get a ton of pressure on Beck, the way their secondary played made Beck look pretty inadequate. And I thought that it was a really fascinating sort of game plan from Indiana in terms of how they tried to tackle things. And I think it showed you could have essentially 4 great line units, as I think that these teams had, approach the game in philosophically different ways and both have some measure of success.
It is interesting too, and you mentioned the success Indiana had. If you watch the team play throughout the year or in any of these games, they never really gave up on the run. And even in tough times during this game, they never gave up on the run. They kept running the ball because they knew that would open up the pass, or some of those great back shoulder throws by Mendoza to Becker. Like those things matter when you're trying to beat Indiana or try to beat Indiana all year. I guess now we're in the past tense because it just didn't happen. They were able to really be balanced all year. Where Miami, some people talked about this, but anytime Beck had to make a big throw this season or had to lead a team with really out the running game, he struggled. So like in this game, like when they were down to 6 at the end, there was no chance to run the ball. They had to throw it. And as you mentioned, the secondary for Indiana was spectacular all day. That Beck really didn't have the opportunity to do any play action. So it really made him struggle. And then obviously that last pass, that sharp intercepted, you kind of felt that was potentially coming, as we saw that even in the Ole Miss drive. There was a couple of those passes that could have been picked or they weren't great passes where that when the opportunity is not there, it really puts him in an interesting spot. So kudos to Indiana for winning the national championship, obviously. But, Miami is going to be really good coming back, as I think Cristobal has reestablished this brand Miami, football, winning in the trenches. That's how he's going to do it. Now it's just a matter of them. Can they repeat this in 2025 or 2026? Sorry.
And we'll get to the kind of early perception of what we think some of these teams might be able to do. It's funny, we rightfully spent most of the season bashing the preseason predictions, right. And yet we're about to dive right into them because it's great to have some stuff to at least talk about as discussion fodder going into it. But yeah, I mean, both these teams acquitted themselves well. And look, I'll say this: Indiana has, after we thought we knew something about college football because of last year's playoff, where none of the teams that had buys made it out of the second round, and Oregon was supposedly the best team in the country, and they had peaked too early, and they ended up losing in their first game. Indiana went the exact opposite. Indiana was the most dominant team over the course of the season. They went in number one after beating Ohio State. They had no problem in their first two playoff games. And, as much as you can say, well, they could have lost the game to Miami. Yes, they could have, but they also never trailed in the game. And so they clearly deserved the number one seed, and they played up to their capacity throughout the course of the entire playoff. But then you look at Miami, a team that nearly got left out. And as we mused when the selection came out, was really an arrangement, it appeared, by the committee to keep the entire playoff from blowing up by not having an ACC team in it, which is what would have happened if they hadn't moved them in. They showed that they belonged, and they really become another proof of concept, as Ohio State and Notre Dame were last year, for why the argument that you should only have 4 teams or 8 teams in a playoff doesn't necessarily hold water, because you can have a season where you lose a game or two and still be talented enough to not just make the final of the championship, but play in what I think is easily the most competitive national championship game since the Clemson Alabama game, what, 2017, 2018, whatever that was. I mean, Miami, they were talented, and we talked about this before. They were a little mercurial. They got I mean, the way they played, if they'd played the way they played on Monday night the whole season, they would have been a shoo-in to be in the tournament. But the fact that they still had that in them, and they come in and they get the last spot and they make the most of it and win 3 games in a row, including games against Texas A&M and Ohio State, really impressive. But I think it also highlights why, in my opinion, the playoff is a good thing, and having 12 teams at least in it is a good thing, because, as we said many times, you just don't get a large enough sample size to really know who the best teams are over a 12-game season when not everybody's playing each other, even in their own conferences.
Yeah, and I think we realized, and I'm putting the G5 to the side, but the 10 teams that were in the Power 4 conferences, maybe Texas A&M, maybe the one that kind of falls off a little bit here, all maybe earned it. Maybe Alabama's the one that maybe didn't, probably could have been pushed out. But we're at a point now where we're going to be 12 teams at least for one more year. And it seems like we've hit a really good spot where we know probably 6 to 7 of those teams win the national championship. One's the G5, and then maybe the other 3 or 4 would need a run. You were more bullish on Miami. I jumped off the Miami bandwagon after the Texas A&M because I was not sure what to expect from that team. Now they obviously proved me wrong, and that's it's fine. But now it's interesting to see how we go forward. As I'm sure maybe our listeners know, the rules change next year, right? We're going to see the Power 4 conferences automatically get a bid. So Duke would have been in this year, and Notre Dame, if they're in the top 12, they're automatically in too. So Miami would have not have been in this playoff next year. It would have been Notre Dame. So it's, as we go forward with this new contract and how I kind of perceive this is going to probably expand to 16 at some point, I do feel like the 12 this year probably was a good number for this specific year. Now, some years it's more, some years it's less, but at least for this specific year, it did seem like we got a really good playoff. And I do also want to add, like, everyone's so worried about the games always being tight and close. If you watch the NFL playoffs, right, how many? I didn't watch them a lot of it as much as I used to, or at least last year. There were quite a few playoff blowouts this year. Yes, there were close games. Don't get me wrong, but that's part of a playoff. You're not going to get close games in every single playoff game. And the 1 seed in this particular playoff blew out 2 of the teams, which you would probably expect being the 1 seed in the playoff, right? So my biggest issue with anything with college football is we're always tweaking it. We can't just let something breathe. I'm happy that maybe we're staying with 12 for the year. Maybe we learned something more, that maybe this is the number, or maybe it should be 16. But at least now I think we give a little bit more time. Hey, we'll get a third sample size of what this can be going forward.
I think about some of the other things that we potentially learned from this playoff. I think we learned the SEC is really in some trouble right now in terms of how the delta between how they view themselves and where they actually are in the sport right now is quite different. Now, I'll say first, I think a big hats off to Ole Miss for figuring out how to marshal their forces and be competitive, especially against the team that they had lost to earlier on in the year. But, Matt, we talked about the narratives going into the playoff, and the narratives were the SEC's strength was going to demonstrate itself in the playoff, that that all we'd heard all year from the beginning, from before the season even started, was how these teams were so much tougher than everybody else in the country, and that the schedules that they played in conference were so much more difficult than anybody else had played in the country, and that there was so much more amassed talent, and you just didn't see it. I
Yeah.
mean, it's one thing to look at the Alabama win over Oklahoma and say, well, that was a dominant performance by Alabama in the second half, but they were beating a really good Oklahoma team. Then you look what happened to them on a neutral field against Indiana, and it's like, okay, do we need to reevaluate what happened in the Alabama-Oklahoma game? That just looked like two teams that didn't know how to play each for one
Right.
half. Georgia, this is the second year in a row now that Georgia has had, I'm not going to say an easy pathway, but a pathway that is clearly very beneficial to them that they can't even get started on because of what happens in the first game against a supposedly inferior opponent. I'm, and then Texas A&M, I think, is probably the team that was the least impressive of all of the teams from the SEC that played in the playoff. And, to lose like that to a Miami team that had looked like it backed into the playoff, like you said, and had tripped over itself a couple of times, it really should not just I'm sure there's some consternation, more than just some, in the SEC offices and in the offices of some of these athletic departments at various schools. But it really should, I think, give people some pause about just ceding to the SEC this idea that the teams in the SEC or top of the SEC are so fundamentally superior talent-wise or
Right.
ability-wise to the rest of the teams in the country. This might be the most level playing field we've had in big-time college football since the late 80s, early 90s. That's probably how we need to start viewing it, not like we're still in the mid-2010s when the SEC was clearly superior to everybody else.
It's definitely going to change, I think, Sankey's, I don't want to say talking points. We're not going to hear these things aren't all the same. Or one thing is, whatever he says, one thing is different than everything else. And certainly that did not, their wins, outside of the Alabama win over Oklahoma, Ole Miss had the only other wins in the playoff, right? They beat Tulane and then Georgia, which is, again, another SEC school. So the only non-SEC school they beat was Tulane in the playoff. You make some really good points. It's really, the Indiana thing is really, I think is going to change the perspective from a lot of viewpoints. It's very similar to the NFL. What is Indiana doing that we can replicate, that we can do? And it's, is this going to become a sort of a copycat league? The one thing, I know, as you mentioned, the SEC, what are they going to take from this? And I'm curious, obviously they're going to 9 conference games, so that's going to be a little bit of a change. But I am curious if we're going to see less developmental quarterbacks. And what I mean by that is I think out of the 10 Power 4 teams that made it, only seven of the teams brought in a quarterback that year. So they brought in someone seasoned who's already been producing and brought that team to the playoffs, right? Where there was only a couple teams that didn't, Georgia being one of them, that had a quarterback come back from the same roster. Dante Moore would be the other, but he sat behind someone. He's coming back. Is this going to be the new normal, that we're not going to see teams develop quarterbacks? They're going to be developed somewhere else and then go to these bigger teams. I think that's probably the one thing you could probably take from this, from Indiana, that this is the way to go. Find the older quarterback that can lead you, that's going to be productive. And it seems like some schools have went there out already. And so I think you'll see less of that. And maybe you see some of these programs that are putting a lot of money into these quarterbacks out of high school just not doing it as much. They're saying, we'll wait to see what the TCU quarterback's doing, or James Madison's quarterback doing, before we actually make that move that's going to lead us to the next spot.
It's a different era of college football. I've been trying to explain to Indiana fans over on Crimson Cast, a lot of them are a little shook that Alberto Mendoza transferred to Georgia Tech. And I was like, I think 5 years ago, even, Alberto Mendoza starts
next year
and struggles probably over the first 4 or 5 games while he's learning, and you don't know for sure if he grows into the role that's needed for the Indiana offense to do what they need to do. I think Indiana, Georgia, Miami, Alabama, all of these schools are in a position now where if you are a playoff contender, you cannot afford to play a quarterback that either has no reps or is not like a 5-star plus prospect. I mean, we saw a couple of teams. Dante Moore for Oregon was in that category. Julian Sain was in that category. And I'll note that neither of those guys acquitted themselves particularly well when it mattered. I mean, Dante Moore had a pretty good game against James Madison, but it was James Madison.
Texas Tech
And
was not great.
it was
Yeah, it
not
was
a
okay.
great game, and he really he really struggled in that game against Indiana, just to put it
Right.
mildly. And Julian Sand, as we've talked about, I'm not trying to cast aspersions on either of these. I think they're both going to be awesome quarterbacks. They showed a lot this year, but this is the top of the upper crust when it comes to quarterback pedigree,
Yeah.
and neither of them really measured up in the playoff. Who did? Fernando Mendoza, who had a year's worth of starting experience at Cal and had a matriculation process through Indiana and Kurt Cignetti's system that took about 6 weeks until he really got rolling. And it really took
Yep.
that first Oregon game for you to really feel like Fernando Mendoza's got it. Carson Beck, who, whatever you want to say about Carson Beck, loads of experience, and when
Mhm.
it mattered, he was able to round it into shape. Towards the end of the playoff. Trinidad Chambliss is a little bit of a surprise, but that's a guy who had prior starting experience.
Experience. Mhm.
I mean, those were the guys that stuck out in terms of really being able to execute. And look, Ty Simpson's kind of got an asterisk on him because of the injuries and everything like
Yeah.
that. So I'm going to take him out of the equation here. But I look at that, and I look at last year when Will Howard and Riley Leonard.
1 year guy, 1 year guy. Yep.
I mean, this is the era we're in. And so when you talk about like Miami and they're trying to get Darian Mensah from Duke, that could get tricky. If they don't pull that off somehow, what will they do? I mean, there's nobody left in the portal.
Their quarterback just left too. The other quarterback just left.
Right.
Right? Yeah.
So when I look across the landscape and I try to figure out, all right, who are we going to see as the early contenders next year? Much like in the NFL, if you have an experienced quarterback, and this is where Oregon, with Moore coming back, like you've got to like their chances because a year's worth of being in the crucible of the Big Ten and being in the playoff and playing 3 playoff games, that's going to be big for Dante Moore to know how to handle things next time. And there'll be other teams that we'll look at with that. But that's, to me, it's a big open question about the teams that are looking for quarterbacks. So not Ohio State, not Oregon. Indiana went out and got a really experienced guy in the portal. I guess Ty Simpson is he sticking around?
He declared, I believe. No, he declared.
So
Yeah.
so this is where that's, I think, the starting point. And I think for a lot of these programs that have gotten used to having a guy on the bench that sits and waits for his turn,
Yeah.
you almost can't afford it as a program now to give that guy his turn.
Yeah, and especially the ones who just made the playoff, like the Bryce Underwoods of the world, who's now coming back, I believe, to Michigan. They were ready for. I mean, I know what they were 7-5 last year. They knew this year would probably be maybe an 8-4, 9-3 season. Obviously, things have shifted since the coaching situation, but certainly he got that full year experience. He's probably in the really small minority, and I have no idea. I'm not a quarterback expert. I have no idea how good he's going to be, but maybe that year will help him for Michigan next year. But I think that's now the new not the rule anymore, right? That's the change we're going to see. And I think it's really going to be interesting with the 2 power conferences, SEC and the Big Ten, is how they view these other quarterbacks from both the Big 12 and the ACC, and how they can potentially get those quarterbacks. And I'm going to include Texas Tech in that as well. They went out and they did not stand still. They're like, well, we obviously got to the playoff, good starting point, but they went out and got a quarterback as well, and because they want to move forward and make that next move, like maybe the next progression for what they see as where they want to be in the football landscape. And I know you and Scott talked about this in your most recent podcast, but where do these schools fall if there is a super conference? And so they're all trying to figure out that spot, and they want to stay in the upper echelon. Texas Tech's one of those teams that needs to, and certainly Indiana probably put themselves there this year for sure. And that's the new college football and how it's going to look going forward.
Yeah. Let's talk about the changes in the small changes that we've got in the CFP setup for next year.
Yep.
And these are not new. These were already in place, but they were news to people when they got re-reported, I think in November. One of the reports is, of course, it's the top, the winners of the Power 4 conferences, ACC, Big 12, Big 10, SEC, will all get auto bids. And that, of course, will, I guess, theoretically knock. It's funny because that would have meant Miami didn't get in, likely, because Duke would have gotten a spot, and you would have taken the last at-large spot in order to make that happen. Although that I guess at that point you're taking James Madison out of the mix, but
Right.
you've also got this thing where Notre Dame, if they finish in the top 12, is guaranteed a spot in the playoff. And the last one has not sat well with most people, even though, yes, technically it was something that was put in last year. It is really, it's funny how Notre Dame, I think, has taken some hits on this, and rightfully so. It feels more like, oh, we're going to make a special case for you with no real good reason whatsoever, other than, well, you're Notre Dame and other teams are not. But the changes in general, it would have made a fundamental difference in what we saw in this playoff. And given what we did see, I think that puts it into a little bit different focus and perspective. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying about we can't just let it breathe for a year. The idea that there have to be these constant changes and tweaks ends up hurting, because now there will be a controversy that happens almost certainly because of one or both of these changes in next year's cycle, where it's like, well, why did we even need to make either of those?
Well, someone meant, I didn't even think about this, but Notre Dame plays BYU next year. So someone put the scenario out: Notre Dame loses to BYU, BYU loses their conference championship, and they're 11 and 12, or what, 12 13, and then, or 11 12, and so BYU gets left out because Notre Dame has to be in. So like, that is a real scenario that could happen. BYU's been really good the last couple of years. They've won 10 games the last 2 years. So it's gonna, I hope that, I hope it doesn't come up, but certainly how these things seem to work out, how Miami got in this year, there's always something that happens with it. They just can't seem to figure out how to put these things together. And it also should be noted that this is the date the national championship will be on next year. So just keep that in mind. That's ridiculously late. It's not going to in Vegas. And so and the quarterfinals is going to be January 1st. So there's going to be this huge lull either between the quarters and the semis and the finals. I assume they're still going to Thursday, Friday format. And that's something that's just not going to change here quickly, because they have the next 3 or 4 national championships built out. But something with this new portal being, the 2nd to the 16th, that's really going to cause issues. Or, with Indiana and Miami, the portal was this week. You're talking about going into February next year, almost February next year with the portal. Another thing, go ahead.
Real quick on that. Yeah, looking at the schedule. So it's a weird schedule next year because there's only one bye week. Week 0 is the last week of August. Week 1 is Labor Day weekend.
So it's the 7th. It's like a late Labor Day.
The 5th, I think. Well, the 5th is the Saturday for Labor Day. Conference Championship week is December 5th. The first round of the playoffs is going to be the 20th and 21st of December, kind of like it was this year, slightly later. Quarterfinals will be December 31st and January 1st. Semis are January 9th and 10th. You're going to have a 15-day gap, a 16-day gap between the first semifinal and the playing of the national championship game.
Yeah. Well, and weirdly, like those 3 rounds prior seem like they're almost like a very close gap, maybe 10, 8, and 8. And then the Super Bowl, which is always 2 weeks off. So I guess this is closer to a Super Bowl format. But what happened this year is, like, it happened last year too. You have the NFL playoffs going for, in between both the semis and the finals, and you have 10 games in between. And again, as an Indiana fan, I was all in, but it certainly feels like you're losing momentum when you get to that final. Like, you're just like, oh man, even though there was 30 million viewers, obviously great, but it definitely felt like that from a fan standpoint. I was going to touch on this too, because the one thing that these past couple of years, this was the last 2 years of the old contract, that these last 2 playoffs, is it was a win and you get a certain percentage of, or a certain couple $1 million for winning that particular game. Miami, for example, I think got $20 million this year. Next year, it's all codified. So like, the conferences, I believe the Big 12, or sorry, not Big 12, the Big 10 and the SEC get 29% apiece, and then it goes down from there. So there's no longer, I don't want to say an incentive to win, but it changes how the structure is built out in terms of who's getting the money down the road. So you're going to see that gap potentially widen, between the Power 2 conferences, the ACC, the Big 12, and then so on. So that will be certainly a change that we won't see directly, but on the backside, it will happen. What else I want to talk? I guess that's and the one bye week thing is interesting. There's nothing you can do about it at this point unless you start making week 0. I think you're going to see coaches arguing that we need the week 0 because you have to have these 2 bye weeks to get through a regular season, and then 4 more postseason games taking place over 6 or 7 weeks. It's going to have to happen.
Yeah. It's, again, as you said, I think it's nice that we'll get a little bit of stasis just in terms of the number of teams. But yeah, the schedule, there's ways to fix the schedule, but this kind of feels like the worst of all worlds with the schedule. You don't have enough rest during the regular season, and then you have an elongated finish to
Yeah.
things. I get why, but I also don't at the same time. So
I can't recall what podcast what we were doing a podcast. One of it was like in November. They're like, we're halfway through the season. I'm like, we've already played 10 games. Like, we shouldn't be halfway. We should
well,
be like, 2/3 of the way because of how the schedule lays out.
well, it was funny. I was talking to several college football people down, like media people down
Yeah.
in Miami in the days leading up to the game, and they were all just like, "I am so tired. This has been such a long season." And it's not that,
But
they're tired of the season; if they're tired from the season, it's an exhausting thing when you're covering it very closely, and it does feel like it goes on forever. Not that it drags, but just that there's a lot, and there's not really there's not a rhythm or a cadence to it that slows down at all, even when you get into the playoff at this point. And then you've got this natural break point that goes way too long. So I don't know that there's a good way to address it at this point,
yeah.
but it is somebody at some point has to say, we've got to fix this calendar in a way that's going to make sense for the teams that are playing it. And I don't know, like, the problem is you've got a limited amount of time and you can't play a whole lot earlier because, as you know, football games in the South in August, not a good
Yeah.
thing. Football games later in the winter session in the Midwest, not a
Right.
good thing. You're dealing with a lot of atmospheric condition issues as much as anything else that you have to reconcile. Not the least of which, then beyond that, is the academic calendar stuff that you still have to abide by.
Yeah. I mean, there is it's interesting. I was thinking about this, and this is a different discussion, but I was thinking about just how well Indiana traveled for all three of these games, the three neutral site games, the national championship, the semis, and the Peach, and then the Rose. And the conversation's always been, how are fans going to travel three times? Now, again, this is really unique, but it got me thinking, what other fan bases would just soak this in? Like these three awesome rounds, and that's why we're at the 12-team playoff, because other fan bases like in Illinois or I don't know, a Utah, whomever, can have these chances to have their fan bases show out for 3 straight weeks or 3 straight games, which was just awesome. I was only at one of them; you were at all three, but just seeing the amount of red or crimson the entire time was just it was
It
awesome
is a
just to be
shade of
part of
red. It's fine, Matt. You don't have to apologize for that. No,
I was just
it's
it was awesome.
it's a good no, it was, and it's a good point. And I think about if Iowa ever made a CFP, I bet their fans would travel if they made multiple games. I think BYU would fit into that category. I think,
Yeah,
I'll also say it is a lot. And as someone who did the Big Ten championship and the Rose Bowl and the Peach Bowl and the national championship, I was very fortunate that I had at least some ways to save a little bit of money on a couple of those steps. It was a lot, though, and
hmm
I there were many fans that I knew who did one of those, or maybe they did one and then they figured out a way to do the national championship game because they just had to be there. But it is a lot. Now, I say that, and then I'll also say that the I get the debate going on back and forth between home sites in the playoff versus not. I don't know if I'm actually on the bandwagon for quarterfinals being moved to campus sites. There's a good argument for it, but then you look at what happened in the quarterfinals, and I mean, Indiana's fans obviously traveled to the Rose Bowl.
hmm
Oregon did not really travel, neither did Texas Tech, to the Orange Bowl, but that almost feels like more a product of we when you
put the
choose,
games in the right spot.
yeah, put the games in the right spot. I mean,
Yeah,
that game that would have been a perfect game to put in the Fiesta Bowl. You think
right.
about, because like that's an easy flight for most Ducks fans from the
Or
West
Cotton Bowl,
Coast.
right? Or the Cotton Bowl, I think. Yeah,
Well, if you and the only question there
if
would be
you're,
is yeah, but
yeah,
the problem is, like, they've already preset
yeah,
the semifinals for next year. And it's going to be Miami and Phoenix, or for Glendale. So it's
yeah,
like, I don't know that you solve the problem by doing it that way. I think there's got to be a more intelligent way of mapping this out. I don't think you can do it like the NCAA basketball tournament
yeah,
because of the sheer volume of people that need to travel in order to
yeah.
make a football game feel full. And, as many IU fans went to the Rose Bowl, you could get in the day of the game for about $60.
Right.
As many fans travel to the Peach Bowl, the tickets weren't that bad day of game.
No.
Now the national championship, different matter, but that's also, I think, a fluke of a fan base in Indiana that was going to go anywhere and pay a lot of money, and a Miami fan base that was right there in their home
Right.
stadium. So it was an unusual circumstance, but you probably can't count on that next year. And I'm going to be interested to see if they actually make a good faith effort to address this, because the thing that doesn't get talked about too much with all of this is a maintenance of the effort to keep the bowls in the mix.
Right.
And at some point, I think we just got to have a realization in college football that the bowls don't matter at this point. They're nice to have. It's great to have the history. And in the Rose Bowl's case, it's great to have the pageantry. But they're not really compatible with a traditional playoff system. And at some point, you either got to move to more campus sites, or you got to be more realistic in terms of what you're doing and not map it out 4 years in advance.
Right, and obviously it was really cool yesterday. I got to go to the Indiana celebration. You did as well, seeing all those trophies lined up. But having a trophy celebration after each round seems a little much, right? Like we got to the next round. Like you don't see that in any other sport, right? You don't see that celebration after each round. You do see it, after when you get to the Final Four in football or basketball. But it is interesting, and I was probably on the bandwagon of to put the quarters on campus. And I think you can't do that on New Year's Day, New Year's Eve. I think you can do it maybe if you move it earlier. But after, like I said, seeing how the teams travel and being at all those different events, I think it makes a lot of sense to maybe continue this just to see how it plays out. I'm just curious, like how that's going to play when we get 7, 8, 9 years down the line, right? And the making those travel plans year after year. Is it going to continue for those fan base that are going every year? Maybe, maybe you saw that in Alabama. I don't know. Hard to say if they would have went to the Rose Bowl, but there's also less time for them to prep to go. But certainly I think there's some things that can be addressed here down the road. And you just hope that they make the right decisions for the players really too, because these gaps are really, really not great. As I know Indiana won their quarterfinal game. The other 3 teams didn't. And so is this a trend? Is this because of the layoff? Hard to say. We don't have enough data. We're 1 for 8. But if we see it again next year, we're 2 for 10 or 2 for 12. Then maybe we're saying, okay, this has to really be looked at.
Yeah, I still don't know what I think about that.
I don't either. I
think part of the problem is the committee and what are they relying on? And it just feels like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that anybody could have predicted. I'm not going to give myself credit for predicting it. I almost predicted Ohio State would lose in their first game. Nobody reasonably would have said Georgia's going to lose that game to Ole Miss. But I also did feel like Georgia was being overrated. And we talked about that as we went into the playoff. I felt like Texas Tech was being overrated because but the committee talks themselves into these corners where, because of the criteria that they supposedly use, what are you going to do? Say, sorry, we're not going to put Texas Tech as the 4 seed, but that's exactly what ended up happening. And I don't know. Part of it just feels like it's so subjective that I don't know that the teams losing in the quarterfinals that are supposedly the hosts, even though they're not really hosts, I don't know that is an artifact of the players having problems. I think it may just be an artifact of the way they're being selected and seeded more than anything else. But there's no way to do it effectively unless you completely fundamentally change how you do the committee work. And that's probably not going to happen anytime soon. It's kind of like the bowls. It's like we're committed to too much of this one thing that probably doesn't work for what we're doing, but that's how we started, and we can't really fix it at this point.
Right. It's a terrestrial thing. It's like, radio or whatever. Like we're still trying to put a square peg in a ground hole or whatever circle hole here, and they almost have to blow it all up. We saw Lanning talk about this. We've saw other coaches talk about this as well. It's like we just need a total reset. Like we've tangled ourselves in such a big web. Like let's sit down before we set the next national championship game and actually figure this out so it makes sense for everybody involved. So we're not having, like I saw someone, I can't remember who wrote this, but free agency / this portal could be really awesome, but it's in the middle of your 2 biggest games of the year. So it's like you have teams prepping while all this is going on, but you really can make it what the NFL does. the free agency period is just awesome and fun to follow. And all these guys are signing here, there, and everywhere. But it kind of loses its luster a little bit unless you're really, really keened into what only the players you're looking at, that you kind of lose it. And so I just wonder if we can get there at some point. It's going to take some time because you have these. There's no czar, or there's no person in charge of college football, and that's the biggest problem. You have these two commissioners right now that are in charge of college football so far apart that they can't even agree on a playoff.
Yeah, and it's not likely to change. It's not just the commissioners.
It's the presidents.
Well, it's also the networks.
Network, yeah.
And you've got this Fox versus ESPN battle about, because, I mean, I will say the one thing I'll note is that we had record audiences on television for all of these playoff games.
Yep.
And I don't think it was just the novelty of Indiana, even though that did feed into it somewhat. You had big brands playing in big games, and they were really, I mean, they weren't all good games, but they were great stories going into the games, and they compelled people to watch. And there's a real fight for who will be in financial control. And this is, again, it's where it's so easy to criticize the NFL, but I think the NFL has always had it right, where you have to seize control of things as an entity, and then you give everybody a turn. And that way, Fox and CBS, and in the NFL's case, ABC/ESPN, and now NBC, they rotate Super Bowls. Nobody's in control, but everybody feels like they've got a piece of the pie. And I would like to see something similar happen, but that will require some top-down management of college football, which we just haven't seen, and, to be blunt, are probably not likely to see, given the people that are in charge or not in charge, as the case may be right now.
100%. Yeah. Thanks for mentioning the networks. Yeah, the networks certainly controlling this playoff, and them, they licensed 2 games at TNT or TBS or whatever it was, TNT, TBS, but that's all because they have the NFL at the same time. So they're boxed in. Another reason why they're boxed into certain time frames is because the NFL and ESPN have these contracts. So it makes it really difficult for college football to get their footing on Saturdays when they should be playing during the playoffs. So again, just a lot of issues that they got to kind of work through here over the next couple of years.
Let's wrap this episode up by talking a little bit about the two controversies that are happening right now in college football. You had Dabo Swinney going nuts in a press conference a couple of days ago, talking about tampering coming directly from the Ole Miss coach on a player that is on the Clemson roster, is not in the portal.
Starting school already.
Yeah. So you've got that going on. And then you've got this controversy with Darian Mensah, who was signed to a 2-year NIL deal with Duke. Miami, who confusingly did not go get another quarterback out of the portal. They couldn't get Brendan Sorsby somehow to visit. I'm still trying to figure out how.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm not going to visit Coral Gables. I'm good in Lubbock. The money must have been very good because I've been to both places, and there's not really a comparison there. No offense to Lubbock, but my God. But now Mensah, a temporary restraining order preventing him from transferring, which I don't think got lifted. I didn't see that.
No, it's not. But he's in the portal, but he can't go anywhere.
Right. So my quick summation on all of this is, when I look at this, I say to myself, this feels like the dam breaking a bit when it comes to how college football is going to navigate these things, and whether we'll see some meaningful either legislative internal changes from the NCAA or external changes imposed by the courts or by by Congress. More unlikely, in as much as one of the reasons why there's so much rampant cheating in college sports, big time, like revenue generating college sports like football and basketball, is that most coaches do not rat out other coaches publicly the way that Dabo Swinney did with Chris Golding. And to do that, I think illustrates a frustration that a lot of coaches are feeling right now, because we know this has happened in a bunch of different places, but it's normally anonymous. It's normally, well, people are tampering with my players, not that guy and that school are tampering with my players.
Right.
So that feels like a bit of a change now politically internal to college football. But then you've also got the issue of colleges and universities have always justified not making athletes employees because they were students, which is why the transfer portal and changing schools is as easy as it is. Because as we've talked about many times, if one of my students at Indiana decides they don't want to be at Indiana anymore as a student and they want to transfer to Indiana State, they can do it tomorrow if they
Right.
want to.
Right.
There's no periods. There's no somebody saying, sorry, you can't do that.
Right.
And for the courts now, and to say, sorry, you're not going to be able to change the school that you go to because of the contractual agreement you have as a football player with the first school, that really, if that's the path we're going down, then everything's about to change relatively quickly.
Yeah, this Duke one is interesting because we saw so the same lawyer was the one for the Washington quarterback, Darren Heitner, and now the Duke quarterback. I'm drawing back on the Washington quarterback's name, and he basically told him, "Yeah, you probably can't go because you know the contract is pretty ironclad." And the Big Ten made the contract, I believe, for all the schools, or at least has the language in there where this is strictly through Duke, where there's no buyout language or no damage language in this contract. What's interesting too is the hearing is not till February 2nd, right? So we still have another week until that happens. And I believe Miami's already started classes. So if we're still on this semester, and we've talked about this, you can roll in second 8-week class and all those things. That certainly can happen. But, and as you mentioned earlier, Miami, there's no other quarterback out there. So this has to be like their guy. And I'm really interested to see, this kid, can he go back to Duke now? Like after, we saw the Washington quarterback go back, but it's really difficult to go back to your teammates saying, yeah, I was planning on leaving because they gave me more money, but now I'm going to go back. And as you mentioned, I think you're right. This will be the dam that breaks everything. It has to be. Like, how much longer are we going to go that these players are not employees? Like he's got a $4 million NIL deal, but hey, he's not an employee. We're not actually going to give him employment status. We're not going to do. Like, I think we're getting closer and closer to that point where it's just not going to happen. With the Dabo Sweeney thing, it's interesting to me. Like, fundamentally, he's probably right. Like, in a way, right? Like, I don't fundamentally disagree with what he's saying. Like, he's already here. He's already agreed to a contract. Like, but he's not an employee from that. So let's take that out of it. But he's saying, hey, this kid's being tampered with. He's already agreed to these terms with us. What are you doing? And I think there's very few coaches that can pull it off. Dabo is one of them because he is one of the stewards of the college football, if you will. Like, he's been around such a long time. And he's calling out the guy that has been around for 5 weeks saying, what are you doing? Like, we're not doing this. He's bringing receipts. And apparently there's over 80 of these cases now out there. So will this resolve some of it? No, because everyone, as you said earlier, there's cheating happens. They don't turn each other in. But will this now say, hey, we're not going to stand for this? Because now Dabo's now saying this is happening. He's showing the receipt. What's to stop Kurt Signetti from doing the same thing, or Ryan Day? Like, these guys now have that, okay, if Dabo can do it, I'm going to say these things as well. And so I'm still shocked that Golding sent this text, and the person saying the text was Golding and not somebody else, I guess, as well. So a lot of pieces here, but like the head coach that's sending that text is really interesting.
I'll say it's a great step forward for Ole Miss, who went from coaches texting escort services to coaches texting other teams' players.
Yes, they made a real progress over the last 10 years.
but no, in all seriousness, it is. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't have said that, but that just came to mind.
It's fine.
But no, it does feel like an inflection point where a guy, and look, Dabo has had his detractors, and certainly this season, I think, revealed that Clemson's fallen pretty far behind what people thought they were, and there may be no school that will have as many perceptional issues in terms of where people thought they were in the pecking order to where they now think they are than Clemson, based upon what happened this year, given all the hype. But yeah, I just think at this point, if you're going to have a coach of that stature, who I think, and whatever you think about where Clemson's at right now, Dabo is still viewed as is certainly one of the 10 most recognizable coaches in college football. For him to get that hot publicly and call out a sitting head coach of an SEC school for doing that, what effect will that end up having on enforcement cases and also just the way that the NCAA decides to try to police these things, or can they even at this point? And that's the latter one is what I keep coming back to is the first step is always identification of the problem. But the second issue is how do you do something about the problem once you've identified it? I don't know what does that framework look like at this point?
Yeah. And we're not talking college basketball. We're seeing this on the college basketball side with these G League guys coming back. There's no enforcement arm anymore. Anytime that you
Well,
see
and an active effort, it seems like, on the NCAA's part to not enforce, because they think
right,
that's going to lead to some kind of external imposed change from Congress, which that might be the dumbest approach of all the dumb approaches that the
right.
NCAA has taken over the course of time.
Yeah, what are they? Oh, for 1 million in these court cases at this point. Like they just love billable hours. It
They
seems
really
like.
do. Yeah.
Uh,
No, I almost wonder if the NCAA enforcement arm has just become a psyop by law firms across the country. It's like, how can we just make money all of the time?
right.
And that seems to
Just
be,
give us a kickback each
yeah,
time, right?
10%
it,
commission, whatever.
it's yeah. I mean, it's the end. It's not unfortunate. I mean, we knew this was probably happening regardless. We've heard stories, but no one actually put pen to paper and showed them the information. I mean, that was an 8-minute rant by Dabo, and Dabo's known for these types of rants, but this was certainly one of his better ones. And then it's just like you said, the NCAA, there's no enforcement anymore. They can't seem to keep anybody, keep anything straight. The JUCO rule, the college basketball the G League rule. They have obviously this going on now as well. The tampering. So I don't know. And now, who was it? Miami said the 20.5 cap is, we shouldn't have a cap anymore. And the cap's been around for 6 months.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's anything they've tried to put and enforce since 2021, even before that. And you can go back to the Alston case, or as far back as the UCLA, I can draw a blank on his name. It's just been a downhill spiral because they can't seem to get in front of the rules.
Nico Iamaleava, I think is who you're thinking of.
Yeah. So all these rules, every time they try to get in front of something, they fall right behind, and it's almost like they need to rewrite all the rules or something. It's just not working, and we're getting to a point where it's like, let's stop acting like these kids are employees and just make them employees.
It's not too different from the CFP conversation that we were having a minute ago. You've got to be honest about the business that you are in.
Right.
And in college football's case, it's about being honest that you're engaged in a business.
Yes.
And everybody involved admitting that and being like, it's okay. We have this very popular product that we make hundreds of millions of dollars a year off of for each conference, many times each school.
Right.
Let's be logical about it. Let's not act stupid about it. Just seems like what intelligent people, especially people tied to institutions of higher education, should probably be doing, as we've said many times. So, we'll see. Let's keep an eye on this offseason, especially with the portal deadline just passed for the championship teams. We've got like a 2 or 3 day window where paperwork is processed and things like that.
Trickle effect,
yeah. But the portal itself, once you're in the portal, is still active and open. Where do players end up landing? That will be sussed out here over the next 4 to 6 weeks. And I think we'll learn some things about this whole process during that 4 to 6 weeks.
And who's to say we're not going to have a lawsuit in April about not being able to go to another school or a transfer portal issue? Like, there's going to be kids that jump in a non-portal, like you said. I can transfer anywhere. I'm going to go to Washington and just be a walk-on and get paid for an NIL deal. What's stopping someone from doing that?
Last thing we wanted to hit, some very early college football playoff projections. And again, big grain of salt with these, because as we saw this last year, the preseason polls don't matter that much. But I'll give you a couple ones. I don't have a graphical representation of the ESPN one, but I'll give you their top 10, and then we can kind of compare the names and the other ones that I saw. But Mark Schleybaugh has Indiana as the number 1 team going into next season, followed by Texas, Notre Dame, Georgia, Oregon, Ohio State, Texas Tech, Miami, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M. And then you go to On 3. I do have theirs. I will show that just so we can break up the visuals with this podcast. Here we go. So you can see here they have Ohio State first, Georgia second, Texas third, Notre Dame fourth, Indiana fifth, Oregon sixth, Texas Tech 7th, A&M 8th, Miami 9th, and Oklahoma 10th. So not a lot of difference there. Ole Miss 15th in this one as opposed to being in the top 10 in the other one. There was another one that I saw early from CBS. They had Ohio State, Texas, Georgia, Oregon, Notre Dame, A&M, Texas Tech, Indiana, Michigan, bit of a surprise, and
Yeah.
then Oklahoma.
I've
It
got the
seems
Athletic here.
a consent.
The Athletic.
Yeah, what's the Athletic one?
Oregon, 1, Ohio State, Georgia, Miami, Texas, Indiana, Notre Dame, BYU, Oklahoma, Texas Tech.
So a lot of decent amount of consensus, basically, about who the top teams are likely to be. Anything stick out to you amongst that group?
It's funny because you guys were talking about it on your podcast earlier today, but the Indiana thing, I feel like they finally arrived, if you will. And they're in all these in the top 10. I think as low as, would you say 8 in one of those, and as high as 1. The Oregon piece makes sense because they did have one of the younger rosters. A lot of those guys are coming back. Dante Moore's coming back, or at least in the top 5. That one makes sense. But it seems like mostly a lot of the teams that were in the playoffs last year are the ones that are in the top 10 this year. So it seems like they're pretty consistent with that. That those teams have reloaded, and I think those are my big takeaways, at least from this first projection. Those things will certainly change here as there's more players kind of maybe coming in, and obviously as we get closer to the season. But that's my early thoughts here.
Yeah, I think the big things for me, it goes back to what we talked about before. It's like, who are the teams that are going to have quarterbacks that have proven themselves to some degree, whether it's at their institution or at another institution? Who do you trust? And I mean, you go down the list. We talked about Ohio State. They'll have Julian Sayin back, and how can he take that leap that he's going to have to take? Arch Manning, he was better in the second half of the season. Does he actually take the leap to be a top-level quarterback? He'll have the experience, at least from this past season, and that should help. Georgia?
Yeah, I mean, Stockton's coming back, right? So that's what they're going with. Yeah.
You got Dante Moore at Oregon. Notre Dame?
Is this what's still Carr?
I think so, yes. And then you got Marcel Reed back at A&M. Sorsby will be at Texas Tech. You'll have Josh Hoover at Indiana. Underwood at Michigan, which I didn't see enough out of him to really feel confident in him leading a team to the playoff, but we could be wrong.
He'll have a coach now, so maybe that'll help him.
That'll help. That's Kyle Whittingham. That'll be probably where he has to make the biggest impact.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, you run down the list: Oklahoma, SC,
that's years back. Yeah.
BYU, Miami's a big question mark. If they get Mensa, sure, I could see that working out really well. LSU, I think, is a really fascinating question because I don't know what Lane Kiffin ends up doing at the quarterback position there.
He's got Levitt.
Well, and yes, he does. But I don't know if Levitt is a shoe-in necessarily as a guy who can lead a team through the SEC.
Oh, that's what you're saying? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, he'll certainly be the starter, but yeah. So anyway, that's the big thing I'm looking out for. And, across all of these different conferences, a lot of it is going to come down to who do you have to play. And that, like, schedule watching and getting a sense of who's going to be really good, especially in the Big Ten, I think that's going to be an interesting one. Like Ohio State, Indiana, Oregon, and Michigan, those 4 teams being kind of at the top end of the poll. Indiana's schedule, we don't know when the games are, but we know that they host Ohio State, they go to Michigan, they go to Washington, they get USC at home. That's probably their 4 toughest games on the year. Ohio State has to go to Indiana, has to go to USC. They have Oregon at home, they have Michigan at home, they have Illinois at home. They got to go to Iowa. That's rough. Like that. That is
they at Texas too. They at Texas too.
And they're at Texas. Yes, that is a that you're not messing around with that schedule. Oregon, they got to go to Illinois. They got Michigan at home. They got to go to Ohio State. They got to go to USC, and they got Washington at home.
Yeah.
And then Michigan, they have Oklahoma in the Big House on the 12th, and then they have Indiana at home. They have to go to Oregon. They have to go to Ohio State. It's all of these teams. Yeah. All of these teams are going to have quite a bit that they have to deal with going into this upcoming year. And then, you look at the SEC and what some of those teams are going to face schedule-wise. What's interesting about LSU's schedule, just as an example, is they got to go to Ole Miss. That will not be a friendly environment. They got to go to Tennessee. They got Texas at home. They got Alabama at home. And they play Clemson in the first game of the year. And you look at Alabama going into next year, They got Georgia at home. They're at Tennessee. They're at LSU. They got Texas A&M at home. Their schedule, I don't think, is quite as taxing as some of the teams that we see in the Big Ten.
Right.
But will they get more credit for their schedule because it's in the SEC? That was the mistake a lot of the pollsters made this year.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, and I was just kind of going through some of those things too, like looking at we'll get into the schedule conversation later in the year, but it seems like with the Big Ten, the top teams, are at least projected top teams, are going to be playing each other. And we didn't even talk about Penn State. I'm sure I think they might actually have one of the easier schedules when I looked at it earlier. It's interesting looking at this top 25 that Alabama's all the way down to 20. When's the last time they were projected to be that low anywhere in any bracket? So I'm curious to see when we're a long ways from it, but as the SEC, not bias, but certainly let's call it bias, changed, where they had 9 teams in the top 19 at one point this year, how that plays out after what happened this year, and the Big Ten being the better conference as it played out, even in the bowl games too. If that changes some of the perceptions across the country in these rankings.
Yeah. Going to be a ton to talk about between where the portal ends up landing for everybody. If we see any other changes. I think Alabama just named a new offensive line coach, or is about to. There's at least a rumor that that's coming up. A lot of stuff that we'll be checking out here over the course of the next few months, and we'll keep going here on Football Weather. We got some fun stuff planned for the off season, as we're going to try to talk to some of the beat writers across the country, see where they think those teams are going in. You've got an offensive coordinator that just got hired at Ohio State, and you've got a bunch of other kinds of things that are, I think we're going to see kind of the dominoes fall and how it plays out. But it should be a fascinating offseason. It should be a really interesting time. And again, with the transfer portal being just one transfer portal now, you've got even more intrigue over the course of the next couple of weeks to see who everybody lands with. The teams that have done really well so far, we'll do a full transfer portal review once everything goes. But you look at the rankings on some of these portals, and right up there at the very top, Texas Tech, Indiana, these are Ole Miss. I mean, these are the teams that were in the mix in the playoff have done a really good job of restocking alongside the traditional powers, and the teams that got new coaches like Kentucky and Penn State. So it'll be a different looking landscape in early March than even what it looks like right now.
Oh, yeah, I agree. We'll get more intel. Obviously, injuries will happen too, but I just thought about this looking at some of this top 25. We're seeing some new blood. Even Alabama being at 20, like that's just, if you said that 3 or 4 years, even 3 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago, like, wow, what's going on, in college football? I think it's really good for the sport that we're seeing some of these new teams, new blood, get in the top 10, 15.
Should be a lot of fun. Looking forward to talking with you and the rest of the folks out there in the Football Weather community about it. Matt, as always, a pleasure, and great to talk with you. And hard to believe our first season with Football Weather is in the books, but what a season it was. And congrats to the Indiana Hoosiers on winning their first national title as a program. What a sequence of events that led to that. And if that's how college football is going to be moving forward, sign me up, because that's a very entertaining thing to be watching.
Agreed. Let's do it again. I'm excited.
All right. For Matt Blaszka, I'm Galen Clavio. This is Football Weather. Thank you for joining us, folks. Thank you to Home Field Apparel, our presenting sponsor. We will catch you folks on the flip side. So long, everybody.